Okay, so we invited Seraz Abrahams. Very exciting to have you share your work. I think you connected through Paolo about photography and you're interested in our project, and you have a huge archive that is almost too overwhelming to work with. But I think your work is just really beautiful, and especially oh, sorry, Wendy. I'm just gonna mute you. So we just enjoy your work and we're wondering how could we maybe engage more with it. And I think obviously looking at work is the best way to start. If you just share whatever you have. You're also an ambassador for Sony, which is very exciting. So your time is really invaluable to us. And I think there's a lot we can learn from your kind of expertise in commercial spaces, but then you also translate it into more documentary. And that's always an interesting balance, I think, for photographers. I won't say more. I'm going to let you have the floor. And if you want to share screen, I think you have that. It should be enabled for you.
Yeah. First, can you guys hear me properly? Because just checking this mic out. How's the audio, guys?
I can hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
Sounds good.
Mandisa, you're putting me under pressure, you know that. First, I'd like to thank Contemporary Archives for actually inviting me to share my work. I'll be honest with you, I've been more nervous about presenting to you guys than doing a Sony workshop presenting to hundreds of people. And it's purely because a lot of the participants or part of the collective that you guys have, I mean, Mandisa being one, Paolo, and you yourself, your work is absolutely outstanding, absolutely amazing. So I'd like to thank you. And like I said, if I do come across as being nervous, please just excuse the nerves. And I hope that I watched the other two sessions that you guys had, and I hope I don't bore you guys too much, because
Seraz, sorry, I wonder if you can put your mic closer.
Is that better? Just check my audio settings. How's the audio now?
Anita, can you hear?
Is that a bit better? Maybe I should just.
I can hear. Yeah, I'm not sure. Anita, maybe a thumbs up if you can hear. I think go ahead, just talk. We'll let you know.
Yeah. So before I start sharing, I thought I'd just give you guys a bit of history in terms of when I started photography and how it started. My journey started in about 2003, and at that point in time, I was sent to Germany on assignment for the company that I was working for. And while I was there, in my spare time, I walked around Hamburg, and I walked into an electronics shop, and I saw a Minolta Dynex 3. That was still a 35mm film camera, because digital wasn't as readily available as it is now. In fact, they were still developing the cameras. So I bought the camera, and when I bought the camera, I had no photography experience, but I always wanted to have a camera. So I bought the camera, and the first thing I did was I went through the manual, which doesn't really teach you much. And YouTube wasn't as widely used as it is today. So in terms of learning photography, my first experience was just putting the camera in P mode, because that's the only thing that I picked up on the manual, and just letting the camera do everything and me just pressing the button. That camera, I had that camera for about 3 years, and in those 3 years, I never learned anything about photography. I was just excited to be able to create images. Like I said earlier, I did in P mode, and I shot everything. Any opportunity that I could get, I would go out and photograph. This was just a 35mm Dynex 3, and I think it was a 28 to 70 kit lens. And eventually, one day, I decided that I need to take photography a bit more serious. And me being the intelligent person that I am, I decided to shoot in manual mode without knowing the exposure triangle at all. So I remember going to ORMS to have my to collect my prints, and at one time the assistant told me, you need to check your camera because half your frames are black. So she actually told me, I'm pretty sure your camera's broken. And I just told her, yes, I need to check it out. I don't know what's happening. And I didn't want to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. So soon after that, coincidentally, I actually discovered that someone I was working with was actually a very good commercial photographer. So he basically started showing me just the basics. And unfortunately, when we started connecting in terms of photography, he then found another job. So by the time he left, I at least just knew the exposure triangle. I didn't know anything about composition, nothing like that, but at least I was getting my exposure right now in my images. And then one day, and this is when I was not sharing my screen. I just need to open my preferences. Give me 1 second, guys. I didn't. No. Try that again. Just let me know if you guys can see this.
Yes.
Yeah. So the man that you see in frame now is the person that changed photography for me forever, and he's not a photographer. I met my spiritual mentor, and I decided that it's my job to just take images of it. I remember sitting in his company, and he has this infectious calmness about him that that seems to basically infect everyone that comes into contact with him. So the minute we'd sit in his company, everything would just seem to slow down. We'd forget about whatever issues we had and so forth, and we'd just be there in the moment, listening to him. And whatever you have to say. And what I did was, I never asked many questions. I didn't speak much, but I sat there and I observed. And I was taking images of him, but for me, it felt as if there was something missing in the images. So I remember one afternoon sitting in his company, and I put the camera down, and I was listening. He was giving a talk, and I was listening to him. But while I was listening to him, I was trying to figure out what I would need to do to capture what I was experiencing, not what I was seeing, but more what I was feeling while I was sitting there with him. So that day, I never took any images of him. I remember going home that night, and I was still shooting on film at that point in time. So unfortunately, I didn't scan any of my negatives, so I can't share any of those images with you guys. But I went home and I started going through my images, and then I realized that my images were all disconnected. There was no continuity in any of the images. They just seemed very random, because at that point in time, all I was doing was just taking random shots of whatever I could. So the next time I was in his company again, I sat and I observed, and I lifted my camera, and I was very deliberate about the images that I took of him. I wasn't just trying to get any image of him. I was looking at how, like I said, how do I portray what I was feeling? How do I get people who are going to view my images of him, how do I get them to feel what I was feeling? And it wasn't easy because, like I said, I had no formal training. So everything that I was doing was I was making it up as I was going along. And by then, YouTube started becoming a bit more popular. some of the tutorials were a bit more readily available and so forth. So I went through some of those things, and you can see these are my first images. They were just snapshots, and I at that time I was just happy to be able to get snapshots of him, because I was living in Cape Town at the moment, and he's living in Durban. So the images that I had were my memories of him when he's not there. So I could go through those images when he leaves Cape Town to come back to Durban. So that's what I was doing for a long time, and I tried a lot of different techniques. Well, the first thing I tried was using different lenses to perhaps see what the difference would make in the images, and none of that worked. And again, one day, another snapshot of him. One day I sat, I'd come up to Durban. I think it was, yeah. No, we actually moved, my wife and I moved up to Durban to be closer to him. And what we used to have was the morning prayer would be an hour before sunrise, and a group of us would join him at his house to sit and do morning prayers, and then to do a bit of reading as well. We call it wazifas. It's like daily litanies that we would do, and that is where I started seeing things slightly differently. I realized that the lenses, they were important, but they were not as important as I thought they were. The one big takeaway that I had from sitting in this company was that if I came into the room and my frame of mind wasn't right, I was rushing or I was irritated, it would actually translate through into my images. So what I started doing was preparing myself. This is going to sound really out there. I started preparing myself before going into the room, that when I sit there, I shouldn't be preoccupied with anything. I should be sitting there trying to get as much benefit from him spiritually as possible. And then once I get that right, and I start taking images of him, then perhaps that will translate through into the images. So that is basically where I started changing my entire approach to photography, purely because I wanted better images of my sheikh. So these are all taken early morning, even though the window's blown out in this image here. This was after sunrise, and these are my best memories of him. In fact, this image for me is one of the images that I love the most, because I would normally be the first person to get to him from the group, and when I enter the room, that is the image of him that I would see. That's the scene that I would see on most days. So these things became even more important to me in terms of capturing what I was seeing properly. So I was very fortunate that he never stopped me from taking any images. In fact, in his own way, he encouraged me to take images of him, not because he wanted the images, but I realized afterwards that after his passing, these images had even more value, not only to me, but to other people in the rest of the group as well. Sorry, guys, I know this is a photography thing, but this is just a bit of history of where I'm coming from. So you can see I looked at every angle, and even this angle, for example, this is a good example of him not stopping me of getting an image, because I wanted to tell his story. This was his daily routine. I was fortunate enough, because of the time that I spent with him, I was fortunate enough to have captured every piece or aspect of his daily routine, from the time that he would get up in the morning until the time he gets into bed at night. And now I realize that how important these images were, not only, like I said, not only to me, but to the people in our group as well. And this image as well, for me, this is what I remember. And that is something that when a lot of photographers come and speak to me about photography, and especially my work and so forth, and they ask for tips and so forth, I always try and tell them, you need to shoot, or you need to, sorry for using that, but you need to photograph great images that resonate with you. If you can't feel the image yourself, how do you expect other people to feel the image? There must be something in the image that you're taking that you have a connection to. So this image, like I mentioned earlier, is one of my favorites because this is what I would see sitting there in the morning, that sun rising over the ocean and my sheikh reading. And for me, this is what made photography interesting to me and precious to me, because of these memories that I have of him. And even images like this with his family, there's so many times where they would allow me just to create whatever images I want. And obviously I would be very respectful about it, because you don't want to portray people in a bad light or when they're not dressed appropriately or whatever, because people are in their homes. You need to be careful which images you create and so forth. But not once did they stop me. So I just took whatever angle I could just to make sure that I had a record of his entire day, at least one day in his life or something like that. So these are all the images that we had. One of the things, this is taken in our prayer hall. We call it a hanka, where we get together on a Thursday night once a week, and we call it it's remembering God basically. It's called, the Arabic word is dhikr, which is basically remembrance. So we chant Allah's name, God's name, or different names over and over and over. And one of the things that I really like, one of the tricks that I like using, not tricks I should say, one of the things that I like using in my photography is I always look for interesting light. And this is one of the images that, again, for me, is one of my best memories of the hanka. It's where we all got together. We all got together for the same purpose, for the same reason. And he would sit in front. And this, as you can see, the center beam had lights on them, and everything else fell into darkness. So there's this beam of light down the middle of the room, where he's illuminated and we all sitting in darkness. We all, a lot of the times people will have their eyes closed and so forth. I would be sitting with my eyes open, watching and observing. One of the other things that you can see in this image as well is I like to play with a slow shutter speed. In a lot of my images I'll have a slow shutter speed because I want to portray this feeling of movement in my images. Again, because I want people, when they view the image, I want them to feel what's happening in the image itself. So again, this is a later image. This was taken, I think, closer to 2015. And a lot of these images are, as you can see, I learned a lot in terms of composition during that time. And again, it was purely just because of sitting there and just observing. This image here, for example, it looks like a plain and simple image. But when I think of him, that is what I think of. He was always in deep contemplation. So later on in some of the other images, there's a little aspect that I'll speak on. But just to allude to it slightly, for me, it shows the responsibility we have as photographers if we want to do documentary images, but also it shows how important it is to capture these moments. A lot of times we tend to just snap off images instead of creating images. For me, I remember clearly when this image was taken. This was on a Saturday morning. I used to sit with him on a Saturday morning, and I sat, and we wouldn't have a conversation. He'd sit there and he'd look out the window in contemplation. And I remember lifting my camera and snapping off the shot and putting the camera down. And that was one of the few images I took of him that day. But when I got back home and I uploaded my images, I realized that this is one of the few images that I wanted to take of him. For me, this captured the essence of who he is. Again, these are just other angles, other moments that I got to capture of him. These images here for me as well. If I sit, or what I should say is, when I was sitting there in the mornings watching him, this is what I would see. So my thought behind taking these or creating these images were, I want my viewers to feel as if they were sitting there. So that means if someone was sitting there on the exact same spot that I was sitting at, what would they be seeing? So that is why that's the thinking behind taking these images. And again, the focus here, as you can see, the focus here is on his hand and the beads. And these beads are the beads that we use to count the amount of times we would say God's name. These are just establishing shots just to show some of the guys that were how big the group was. Another image that I like, again, a lot of my images, I prefer the subject not to look directly at me, and it comes from sitting in his company as well, because I have very few images of him looking directly at the camera. Another image that I'm very proud of as well, that's one of my favorites. Again, just going back to that one. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was that I like looking for interesting light. This is an example of the light that I look for, where certain aspects of the subject is highlighted. Again, this was at the end of one of our morning sessions where we were praying, making dua. This is during dhikr. All of these moments, that this image as well is one of my favorites, because again, I remember taking this. This was very early. I think this was at about just before 5. I can't remember exactly which day it was. It was just myself, and there were a few others. The rest of the group hadn't arrived yet, and he was reading silently. He sat forward, and I remember just sitting there. What I used to do was I used to get to the room and sit and just watch. I never used to read anything. Only after a certain time, I would start my reading and so forth. So I would just sit there and observe him. And because of observing him so often, there were times when I knew exactly what he was going to do next. So I would be ready. If I wanted an image of what he was going to do, I would be ready for that shot. And again, I've never met anyone who, what can I say, was, it's going to sound bad, weird, I should say, closer to God than my sheikh. And look, I know it sounds a bit weird, but that's what he means to me and represents to me. And it's because of him that I think I upskilled myself for photography. That was firstly the reason why I started taking photography seriously. I'm going to share, just open that again. I'm going to share the place where I actually cut my teeth on. And I think this is the one thing that everyone knows me for, if I can put it that way. Sorry guys, just give me 1 second. Now, my share, again, a bit of history of the scene that you guys see in front of you. My sheikh was the grandson of Hazrat Sufi Saab. Hazrat Sufi Saab was a saint from India that was instructed to come and settle here in South Africa. And he came to South Africa around about the 1900s. I think it was 1903. And came here with nothing. But within a few years, he established 12 mosques all around South Africa. And each mosque was a center in the community that it was in. For example, the image you see in front of you is of the Riverside Mosque. well, not mosque, but that's his mausoleum where he's buried. At the mosque, in the mosque complex, he would have you'd have a hospital, he'd have an orphanage, there would be welfare services, any poor people who required anything, they would come there, and it was totally open to everyone, not only Muslims. It didn't matter who you were. If you needed something, you would come to Hazrat Sufi Sahib, and he would see whatever he could do to. So this is the place where I really cut my teeth in terms of photography. Let's get out of this. I have images going as far back as 2011. And what I never intended to create a body of work of Sufi Sahib. I always just, whenever there was a function at the mazar, that's what we call it, the mausoleum, I would go there with my camera, purely firstly because my sheikh was there, so I could get images of him, and just to try and capture images of the actual function itself. And it was only after I spoke to Paulo and I spoke to you, Neve, at the one workshop that you guys had in town, that I actually started going through the images that I had of the Riverside Darbar, and that's when I realized how many images I had. Like I said, I have images going as far back as 2011 to date, and I think there's about 10,000 images that I've taken. Obviously, not all of them images that I'm proud of, but one thing that I realized going through those images, and again, this is purely because of speaking to Paulo and Neve about this. One thing I realized was that because of the volume of images and because of the time span of the images taken, you could track changes that happened at the Darbar. And again, it showed me just how important these type of images are. Because through my images, I could see children grow up. I have images of Hazrat Sufi Sahib's family, his great grandchildren, where they were 6-7 years old back in 2011, and they're still at the mazar. And over the years, the images that I've taken of them, you can see, basically, you can watch them grow up. One of the other things that I noticed about the images that I have is I could see when someone passed on, because a lot of times at these functions, you would get certain people who would come to the function and they would always sit on the same spot, especially when it comes to family members of Hazrat Sufi Sahib. So I went through the images, and you would see in one set of images, you would see, for example, you'd see a man who always had a spot in the corner of the mazar. Any function they would have, he would be sitting on that spot. And then one year, he's not sitting there anymore. And again, like I said, you can track children growing up, but you can also track people getting old and who passed on. So after speaking to Neve and Paulo about this, I realized that this was actually a very good archive for the actual Sufi Sahib Darbar as well. And I've shared the images with them. They've added the images to their archive as well. So this is, I'm just showing you guys the outside of the mazar itself. I just want to get to the top one over there. Yeah, this is the main mausoleum where Hazrat Sufi Sahib is buried. You go down there. Sorry guys, I should have been a bit more organized for this. But just like with what I mentioned with my sheikh in terms of the images that I wanted, this is where I really learned photography, because like I mentioned earlier, my main focus when I'm at these functions is I always trying to portray exactly what it is that I'm seeing and experiencing. So there's times where I would stand outside, for example, in this image. a lot of times in summer, it's unbearably hot inside, and a lot of the men would be sitting outside, and this is the view that they would have. I post my work on Instagram and Facebook and other social media platforms, and a lot of people that view my work are people that normally come to Mazar, and there are times when they cannot attend these functions. So because they know that I will most probably be there, they look forward to seeing my images, because it keeps them in touch with this place that they love the most. This image over here shows one of the tricks that I have in my arsenal, where I like highlighting certain aspects of a frame. Again, this is what you would see if you'd be sitting outside. The lights outside wouldn't be as bright as they are inside, and that yellow cloth that you see on the inside, that is called the chadar. And the significance behind that is, as Muslims, we are taught that when a saint passes on, angels wait for him with sheets of silk. And as his soul comes up through the heavens, they wrap his soul in these sheets of silk. So what we do is, at his grave, we would get these sheets of material as well, and we cover his grave, trying to emulate what the angels are doing. So again, what I like doing is I like putting things into context, in terms of the place, the time, and if you look at the top half of the frame, for example, well, I know what's written there. It says Ya Sufi Saab. So when lovers of Sufi Saab see this, they know exactly where this is. This is inside the actual mausoleum, inside the mazar itself, and this is the time just after those cloths are put onto the grave. The family members would come closer to the grave, and they would put these cloths on and then cover the graves with images. The first grave that you see on the inside here, that is the grave of Hazrat Sufi Saab. And then there's another grave at the back. That's the grave of Hazrat Sufi Saab's mother. He was very close to his mother, and that's why they are buried that in such close proximity. So again, I would stand there and wait for these moments to happen. And one of the things that I've learned is that just snapping of images doesn't mean you're creating meaningful images. You need to observe. The biggest lesson that I've learned shooting or creating images at the Mazar is that Cartier-Bresson always spoke about the decisive moment, and that's the one thing that I've learned creating images in Hazrat Sufi's Mazar, is that if you don't observe and you don't wait for the right moment, you will be creating images, but the images wouldn't have any meaning to them. So I would observe, I'd stand there and wait and wait. And because I attend these functions so much, you tend to know what's going to happen next. So I would, for example, I would position myself in such a way that when people react to something, I would see the reactions, and I would know when they would react, for example, because I know it at a certain time in the function, emotions run high, and I would position myself for that. So these are all things that I feel photographers that are or people that are getting into photography, these are all lessons that I feel that are very important for them. And I know it's easier said than done in the beginning, but it's something that I took very long to know. So if there's it can be done a lot quicker than the time that I took to get to that point where I realized this. And I feel that sometimes these are things that are not spoken about when you're speaking to newer photographers, I should say. The people around the grave, I just want to point out, like I said, these are all family members. This gentleman here with the flowers in his hand, this is the great-grandson of Hazrat Sufi Saab. That's another great-grandson of Hazrat Sufi Saab as well. So this man, gentleman over here with the flowers up to his forehead, he's passed on. So a lot of times I would get people coming to me, asking me for images that they've seen of their family members that have passed on. And again, it shows me that, you know, it's a great responsibility, and it should be treated as that. In terms of creating images like this. Again, one of the frames where I deliberately used a slow shutter speed, because these chadars that you see here on the left hand side, this is one of the sheets of cloth that will eventually get laid on the grave of the Sufi Sahib. These things are passed all around the men, so it goes over everyone's head. So I deliberately used a slow shutter speed just to show a bit of movement in that. There we go. This is the next series of images was taken at we call it the Urs of Hazrat Sufi Sahib. It is the death anniversary of the saint. And as much as I like being artistic, I know establishing shots just to put some context in terms of what's happening is important as well. So these are the type of images that I would take. You see the guy holding the red pole in the middle over there. That is a friend of mine, and these colors are the colors of the Chishti Sufi order. And it's a huge honor to walk in front of the procession with the flag hoisting the colors of the Chishti order. I remember just before I was standing next to him talking about it, and he turned to me and he told me he's so nervous because it's such a great honor. So I stepped back and I snapped up the shot. And as I took this image, he leaned forward. Just before I took it, he just leaned forward and had his head against it. And that's when I took the image. And again, it shows that you need to be observant and you need to wait for that moment before just snapping off images. The next couple of images are just to put add a bit of story towards them, to context to the series. This is a lucky shot, I should say. I snapped off a few frames because I wanted to get him walking, and the wind was just blowing the flag, and by luck, I snapped this image where the tassel was covering the small boy's face. One of the things that I like doing as well is, I won't say that sharpness is overrated, because it is important in certain images, but there are some of my images that are not very sharp, and I would normally lean towards getting the image, even if it's not technically on spec, but I would rather go with getting the image, getting an image instead of leaving it, thinking that my camera can't handle either the ISO or it'll be too dark or whatever. This image is actually a friend of mine. His name is Zaki. He was standing next to me while we were busy reading the prayer, and I had my 35mm lens on me. I never realized where my focus point was, because I actually wanted to get a shot of his hands in focus. But as I lifted the camera, someone bumped me from behind, and the camera shifted. So you can see the focus is more on his beard. And when that happened, I was a bit, I wouldn't say upset, but I knew I missed the shot that I wanted to get. When I got home that night and uploaded the images, I actually realized where the focus part had been. And for me, this is a much better shot than having the hands in focus. Again, one of the functions there. What I like doing here as well is I won't say that I don't like color, but I prefer black and white for a lot of my images. And it's not because I think it's artistic. I just think that they work better as black and white. They have better, what's the word I'm looking for? They have more meaning for me when they are either converted to black and white or photographed in black and white. this image as well. This was taken when we were busy with the Vicar at that function. And again, as you can see, I use a slow shutter speed just to portray that feeling of movement. The one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, I just want to get to one of the images. Yeah, the one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is, and I should have mentioned it earlier, is one of the big takeaways from creating images at the Mazar. It's something that I think is fundamental to the way I shoot or the way I photograph, is that I realize that if I don't respect the subject that I'm shooting or that I'm photographing, if I don't have respect for them, if I don't have a connection with them, my images would not, for me, my images would not have any meaning. It might sound weird, but when I go through some of my earlier work where I just created snapshots, I was just snapping away because I wanted images. And I look at the images that I've taken now, not that I'm a master photographer or anything. I realized that back then I was just creating images for the sake of creating images. Now it's a case of, before creating images, I would sit and I would observe and I would watch. On a few occasions, it doesn't happen at the Mazar, but at some other mosques, before I even create an image, I would ask for permission, because not everyone is willing to have the image taken, and it's very disrespectful, and it kind of sours the moment as well. If you take an image and the subject of the image comes to you and tells you, please delete that. He doesn't want to be, or he or she doesn't want to be in those images. So one of the things that I've learned from creating images at the Mazar is you need to have a connection. You need to be respectful. The one big advantage that I have from shooting at the Mazar is that everyone knows I'm going to be there. And in a certain way, I've become invisible to people, because there are certain images that some people would not agree with. I need to find that image now, but leave it there.
There's just a comment about the audio. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
I'm hearing okay. I'm not sure if everyone else is, but maybe just if you can hold the mic a bit more steady.
Is that better?
Winston, is it better? Okay, all right, sorry. But Seraz, maybe another couple minutes, because I also want to get, if people have any questions, maybe they can put chat, or actually even come alive and ask your questions as we go along.
How are we for time though?
As well. But yeah, please go ahead.
I think, I think just to end off, I see it's 10 to 8 really. A few things that I've learned, like I mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, is if you don't respect your subject, you're not going to get good images. If you are going to rush, if you're going to come into the scene with a rushed attitude, where you just want to get whatever images you can, and you're going to leave, your images are going to seem very rushed. So look, guys, this is how I approach my photography, and it's worked for the style of images that I want. I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone, but these are just a few of the things that I've learned creating images at these in these religious spaces. So I'm not going to talk from now on. I think I'm done for tonight. If there are any questions, we'll open it up to the floor.
I'll just talk before whilst people are maybe typing. But I think the one thing that just proves why like long-term bodies of work are so invaluable is this thing like of that real intimacy, that you really get, people get to know you, you get to know them, and that just makes your work way more richer, stronger, ethical, like all of these positive things when it comes to really investing your time into producing images of the same stories. I mean, maybe it's tiring, maybe some people get, if a photographer's photographing the same thing, they get bored, but there's like a lot of value And that's why you're so prolific. You're just within the story, but it shows like you can't get those moments if you don't know the people intimately. I think that's something that both Paula and I reflect on with your work.
I think, it's, I think the way, and I hope this doesn't come out wrong, but I think the way photography is being taught today in certain aspects is incorrect, because the value of photography seems to have been lost in certain aspects. And I'm not saying everyone is doing it, but I look at my journey. My journey started in 2003, and it's only, I would say, from 2015 that I really got into it. And that's probably because I never had someone teaching me along the way and so forth. Nowadays, you've got social media, you've got YouTube and Facebook, and everyone's a photographer and so forth. So there's a lot more easily accessible material in terms of learning photography. But that being said, something seems to have been lost along the way in terms of and I'm not saying that documented photography is the only genre that there is. I'll give an example. When we do some of the Sony workshops, we get asked certain questions by people who have been in the industry for a while, but these questions are very basic. So we go over a few things and so forth, and that's what made us think in terms of, you know what, there must be a way to tell people to slow down. It's not about creating the image so you can post it and everyone is going to like it. It's not about that. It's about taking your time, because I feel when you take your time when you create images, that's a way of respecting your subject that you photograph, and then you'll get those the images that you really want. This image here, for example, this is a friend of mine, Shoaib. He passed away during COVID, and again, this is one of the images that his father actually asked, please, can you send me all the images you have of my son? So, it shows the value of photography. And I'm not saying it because it's my photography, but it shows the value of photography in general. You're capturing these moments that are never going to happen again. This, I'll show you. These three images, for example, this is the Maulana Ghulam Muhammad. He's the current head of the Sufi order in South Africa, the Chishti Sufi order in South Africa. And I was chatting to his son. This is his son sitting in, telling his son how important it is to spend time in the company of his father, because there's a lot he can learn from his father. So I asked if I could create some images of them, and he agreed. Again, I've been fortunate that they don't stop me. So this was the first image, and for me, it just didn't do anything. And the second image didn't do anything as well. And then I looked, they were sitting across from a window. This image is actually a reflection of them. So this for me made more sense, because we have the head of the Chishti order, and people who frequent the Mazar will recognize that's the mausoleum of Hazrat Sufi Sahib. So, for me, there's a lot more context in this, but also just the way he was sitting. It's one of the things that I realized as well. If you rush and don't take your time, a lot of times you rush, you come in, you stand on one spot and you just start fighting away. Whereas if you take your time and move around your subject if possible, there's always a nicer angle or a better angle.
Lou, come alive, please. Or I see hands. Please just unmute.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, Sangonani. So I have a question, Oguti. Does the Quran say anything about photography? Because recently I was out for a photo walk. So I am doing a project and I'm covering like Ifosoras as a township and its development. So I'm photographing churches and schools and just like portraits of people around my township. So a few days ago, there's a mosque here, And then I met a group of Muslim boys and I asked them for a portrait. And they said it's against their religion. And they said that the Quran said, like, it's not okay, like, to make images. Yeah. So I wanted to know, what does it say exactly? Because they were saying, like...
Sorry.
They were saying that it's like I'm capturing them or something, you know, like they can't live in the images, like something like that. So yeah.
Yeah, in the Muslim community, there's a difference of opinion in terms of photography. There is a hadith of our Prophet ﷺ where he mentions that don't make the likeness of beings, don't create the likeness of beings, but he was referring specifically to drawings that he saw. So this is a question that I asked quite a few of the alims, and I was fortunate enough, I am fortunate enough to know quite a lot of alims, and all of them have told me the same thing. There's nothing wrong with photography. There's a small handful of Muslim alims who believe photography is wrong, and unfortunately, that handful lives in South Africa, if you understand what I'm saying. So, and earlier I mentioned that in certain mosques I ask permission. It's because of this that I ask permission. My wife and I do wedding photography, and there are times when we are asked to photograph nikahs, the actual wedding ceremony. One of the questions we ask them is, which mosque is your nikah happening at, and who is the imam that is doing the nikah? Because either the mosque won't allow it or the imam won't allow it. But like I said, it's a difference of opinion, and it's a small handful of Muslims who believe photography is wrong. Trust me, every alim that I know, I've asked this question, and they all told me, you know what, there's nothing wrong with photography per se. So your best bet, you did the right thing. The best bet is to ask, if you do see a group of Muslims, to ask before you create images. But I mean, as you can see, most of my images are of Muslims, so it's widely accepted. It's just that difference of opinion that exists. I hope that answers your question.
Winston, do you want to come alive and ask your question? And then Mandisa, yeah.
Hi, Seraz, Winston from Cape Town. Just wanted to say that I'm really enjoying your work. It's amazing to see, especially in this space where capturing people with faith, people of faith, and people practicing their faith, and capturing those moments. It's capturing the solemn moments. You know, I think two things that from this presentation and what we are speaking about here is that one is that there needs to be you have to have a keen observation, and two is that you have to establish or especially in places of faith, you have to try and establish that context. I photograph on the media team and media ministry at my church, as well as other photography as well. But like, I want to perhaps pick your brain and find out how do you find that context? You were speaking about the silk cloth and establishing a shot for context of that. Now, for me, like, it would have been one thing that if it was inside the area that practice was being exhibited, or pardon me, I forgot what you called it.
Yeah.
If it was inside the area or outside the area, but I feel as though you capturing it outside the area gave it more context, because then you have the people around and inside as well looking towards this element that's being practiced, towards this practice right now, and that for me gave context that this is a practice of significance,
yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. I think you know where I'm going with this, but just the one question that I have after that long-winded observation is, how do you find that context, like from my side as well? Like, okay, I'm in a church arena, but I feel like there's a lot of practices that we that have similarities. But just that. How do you find the context? Let me stop. Yeah, thanks.
I think for me, it's a case of knowing what I'm photographing. I know the significance of Sanlo. That's the one thing. So I know at what point in the program Sanlo is going to happen. So that's one factor. The second factor for me is what do I want my viewers to see and feel when they look at the image? So, for example, that I hope I can get that image up again. That image of Sufi Saab. It's a other folder, I should say. That image of Sufi Saab. I sat and waited for that image because I knew what was going to happen. So I initially I was inside. I created a few images inside, and then I came out because I realized at one point that most of my shots were of the function inside the Mazar. That's when I came out, and I was walking around outside, and one of the things that I noticed was because the lights are on the inside of the Mazar, and the outside lights are a bit dimmer. That contrast was there. So what I did was I sat and I waited for those moments because I knew they would be passing those sheets of material. So that's my thought process behind a lot of these things. And like I mentioned earlier, I think if you know the significance of a practice, and if you have the luxury of time, which I had, because like I said, I knew exactly at what point in time that was going to happen, you can set yourself up to get those kind of images. Initially, my first couple of tries weren't that great. But then, like I said, as you do it more often, you build your experience and you kind of figure out where you need to be to get certain shots. The main thing for me is always when someone looks at my images, what do I want them to see and feel? So I would always try and set myself up to that, and I go as far as thinking in terms of if someone with my height would be looking at the scene, what is the angle they would be seeing it at? Because that's what I want them to feel. I hope that answers your question, Munsi.
Thank you so much, Seraz. Unfortunately, we both have that height advantage.
Yeah, but I have to tell you, you know what, we should consider ourselves very lucky that we get to photograph these gatherings, because I find that it's at these gatherings where you see raw emotion.
Yeah.
No one. Well, I shouldn't say no one. There might be a few people that are putting on a show, but majority of the people there they've come there for one thing, and you can see it on their faces. So it's such an honor to be there, to be able to capture these moments, and that is why I kept saying that, you know what, it's something that shouldn't be taken lightly, and that kind of thinking I extend to all my photography, because COVID was like a turning point for me in terms of where I started shooting things other than at the Mazar. And I learned that if I apply the same principles that I use when I'm photographing at the Mazar, if I apply it to scenes outside of a religious space, it gives those scenes a different feeling as well. I'm just going to, let me just check. Just want to check something, yeah.
While you're checking out, if we could, and that I have this opportunity, the one thing else that I written under my key point of observation is that there were a couple of images that you were showing of the Imam, and that, as I understand it, everybody has their personal flow. The people of faith, they have their personal flow that they follow, and their own special way of connecting to God throughout the procession of events. Right? There's a manner in which they start, there's a manner in which they deliver the message, and there's a manner in which they find opportunities to could have people's attention. And so, like, I wanted to know, like, have you found yourself also, working in that flow and knowing the person that you are, knowing the person that you are photographing, and find yourself understanding their flow and following them along their flow and how they proceed throughout the event as well?
Yeah, that it's something that's very important to me, and for me, if I don't understand that, and I take an image of them, the image wouldn't have the right meaning and context for me personally. So, even though I'm at these functions with my camera, people might think that I'm not part of the function. But I was discussing it with a friend of mine because he asked me, now, when at these functions, you have the camera, you're concentrating on the images. You're not concentrating on the function. And I told him, I will only take, it's going to sound really out there, but I will only take an image of a scene that I can feel myself. Because I find that if I don't feel the scene, my viewers are not going to feel the scene. So if there's someone in the frame that I'm photographing, I always try and put myself in their shoes. For example, firstly, how would they like to be portrayed? Secondly, what are they going through? What are they feeling at that moment? And I find, for me, those are the things, when I add those factors to my workflow, to my thinking, it actually helps in getting the images that I want.
Well, thanks so much for that. Thank you, Seraz.
No problem.
Mandisa had a question. Can we do the last question, and maybe we can make it like a little bit short because you're going over time a bit. Mandisa, just go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Seraz. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. You know that I'm a big fan of your work. I think the sensitivity around the way you document is very refreshing. And I think the more you speak about it, and the more you show the images that you've made over the years, one begins to really appreciate the faith, as well as the spiritual aspect of the work. And I'm finding that I'm learning so much more by you just explaining certain things that we may have seen on the images, but we might not have understood the significance. Like, for instance, the one on the silk material, I think it's such a beautiful, explanation behind it. Also carrying with the way, just in general, the Muslim faith, uses words and poetry. I find that it's a very poetic kind of faith. So I'm just interested in finding out, would you ever be open to pairing your work with written text? So to provide a bit of context behind some of those images. I think there's an interesting level of depth that an ordinary person might miss if it's not done. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you so much.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for your words there, Mandisa. Like I mentioned earlier, when I saw you connect, I got really nervous because you know that I'm a great admirer of your work, and I find that from time to time I actually go through your work just to get some inspiration. So, to answer your question, it's something that I've been thinking about, and I've chatted to a few people, not recently, I must add, but I have chatted to a few people. It's something that I would love to do. It's just that I need to actually do it. And I think after tonight, especially after your question, coming from you, I should say, it's something that I will definitely pursue. There's a few things that I mentioned that I actually spoke to the head of the Riverside Darbar about, in terms of these images and so forth. So that is one of them. Getting a selection of images and putting words to them. The one thing about these functions that I need to mention as well is, and I'm gonna keep it short, Niv, is that there's Urdu poetry that's read, and Urdu is such a beautiful language. You can really describe things in a million different ways. So one of the ideas was to have these images paired with Urdu poetry and then a bit of a translation beneath it. So I think it's something that I need to really get off the ground. And if I do, you will be the first person to be notified and to get copies of it.
Mandisa is agreeing wholeheartedly in the comments. Yeah, I think this conversation can go on forever, and I don't know, I'll speak for you. Seraz is a very approachable person, so I don't know if people can DM you, maybe to continue conversations. But yeah, I think your archive is really amazing, and we want to work with it somehow. This is the first step, and maybe in these storytellings, maybe that's also an approach, is just to like record oneself and reflect on the images. That's another way of kind of archiving stories. So yeah, I think, I don't know if you have any last words, but I'm saying thank you. Maybe just some context. Also, Captivate, this is a little
I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, yes.
And then thank everyone for taking time out just to connect. I hope I didn't babble on for too much because I have a very nasty habit of just rambling on and on and on. So thanks again for the opportunity, and I hope what I shared was not too bad.
No, it was wonderful. Cool. Yeah, thank you everybody, and yeah, we'll see you in the next session. If you have work you want to share, you can DM us and we'll make it happen. Cool. All right. Good night.